All right, Hasno Bana. So you want to talk about Shakespeare's women.
Always happy to talk Shakespeare.
Well, you had a really interesting question about Jessica from Merchant of Venice. Can she, and this is your word, can she be seen as a nemesis to Portia?
Oh, that is a good question.
Yeah, and you pointed out how they both defy their fathers, but they go about it in very different ways.
Yeah, they do. And I think that contrast actually reveals a lot about how Shakespeare viewed women's agency, in a society that really tried to limit them.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of Portia and Jessica, I think it might be helpful to set the stage a bit.
Right. Context is everything.
So take us back to Elizabethan England for a minute.
Hmm.
What was it actually like to be a woman back then? How much freedom did they really have?
Okay, well, imagine a world where everything, like literally everything, is steeped in religion.
We're talking post-Reformation England, right?
Exactly. Protestant teachings are everywhere. And when it comes to women, well, let's just say the message was pretty clear.
And that message being,
Be submissive, be obedient, and for goodness sake, stay in the domestic sphere.
so kind of like the Victorian ideal of the angel in the house.
Very much so.
Okay, so lots of pressure to conform. But were there any women who pushed back against those expectations?
Well, you can't talk about Elizabethan England without talking about Queen Elizabeth I, right?
The Virgin Queen herself.
Yeah, she's a fascinating figure, a powerful monarch in a world that largely relegated women to the sidelines.
So she was kind of a walking contradiction.
Absolutely. But it's important to remember that Elizabeth, while defying expectations for herself, didn't exactly champion the cause of women's liberation in general.
It's like she was saying, I can break the rules, but you can't.
Right. And then you have the popular stories of the time, like the tale of patient Griselda.
Oh yeah, the ultimate submissive wife.
Yeah, enduring all sorts of trials and tribulations without a word of complaint. It makes you wonder, why would a story like that be so popular if women were actually, behaving that way all the time?
So maybe there was more going on beneath the surface, more resistance than we might think.
Perhaps. And it's interesting, too, there were actually quite a few men at the time writing these defenses of women.
Really?
Yeah, arguing that women were capable of education and intellectual pursuits.
So not all men were buying into that whole submissive wife thing.
Not entirely. But even these defenses, they still emphasized women's domestic roles. It's like they were saying, yes, women are smart, but let's keep them in the home where they belong.
So there was still a very clear limit to how much they could challenge the status quo.
Exactly.
Okay, so with all that in mind, let's turn to the Merchant of Venice. We've got Portia, bound by her father's casket test. Jessica, who elopes and defies her father quite dramatically, and then Nerissa, Portia's very witty maid. Do any of them fit the mold of the ideal Elizabethan woman?
Well, on the surface, they might seem to. Portia's wealthy, beautiful, looking for a husband. Jessica's dutiful until, well, she's not. And Nerissa is, of course, the loyal servant. But when you start to dig a little deeper, things get a lot more interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's start with Portia. She's obviously intelligent. But does she ever actually defy her father?
Oh, absolutely. Remember that line she has? I will do anything, Nerissa, she says, ere I will be married to a sponge.
Oh, I see. She's not just going to accept any husband her father's test throws her way.
Exactly. And some scholars even suggest that, maybe she's manipulating the test behind the scenes to make sure Bassanio wins.
Now that's an interesting theory.
Right. It makes her a much more cunning and, well, subversive character than she might appear at first glance.
So, maybe not so obedient after all. Okay, what about Jessica? She's definitely breaking the rules, but what's motivating her?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Is it love for Lorenzo? Is it teenage rebellion? Is she drawn to the Christian faith?
Or maybe a mix of all three.
Probably. But we also have to think about how her actions would have been perceived by an Elizabethan audience. Remember, this was a time of intense anti-Semitism.
Right, so even though she's defying her father, she's also playing into some pretty dangerous stereotypes about Jewish people.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation. And it makes Jessica a very fascinating character to analyze, both defiant and, in a way, complicit.
Okay, so we've got Portia potentially working the system to her advantage, and Jessica making this dramatic escape. Where does Nerissa fit into all of this? She seems much more content in her role as Portia's maid.
But don't be fooled by appearances. Nerissa is actually quite a firecracker. She echoes Portia's, skepticism about arranged marriage. She participates in that whole ring trick, remember, and she ends up challenging her own husband, Gratiano.
Oh, I see. It's like she's testing the boundaries of her own freedom, but within the confines of her social role.
Exactly. Even in her position as a servant, she finds ways to poke fun at male authority, to, assert her own wit and intelligence.
So even the seemingly most compliant women might have a rebellious streak.
You got it.
All right, so back to Hassan al-Banna's question. Can we really call Jessica a nemesis to Portia? They both defy their fathers, but in such different ways.
I think nemesis might be a bit strong, but their contrasting approaches do highlight the different ways women navigated, these patriarchal structures. Portia, with her wealth and social standing, she might be able to work within the system, bend the rules to her advantage. Jessica, on the other hand, feels compelled to make this complete break, choosing a different life, but at a significant personal cost.
And it's really interesting that Shakespeare chooses to have both of them dress up as men at certain points in the play.
Oh, yeah, that's
What
crucial.
do you make of that?
Well, in Elizabethan England, women wearing men's clothing, that was a huge taboo.
Really?
Oh, yeah, it was seen as disrupting, like, the God-given order of things.
Wow, so Shakespeare was really pushing the envelope there.
Absolutely. By having these women don in male attire, he's playing with fire. And it allows them to move more freely, take on different roles, but it also raises questions about gender and identity, What does it all mean?
We're definitely going to have to dig into that more. But first, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Miranda from The Tempest. How does her situation compare to the women of Merchant?
Okay, well, unlike Portia and Jessica, who are navigating this, bustling Venetian society, Miranda's been raised in isolation on a magical island, completely controlled by her father, Prospero.
So a completely different world.
Oh, yeah. She hasn't even met another woman her entire life.
Wow. And yet she, too, seems to challenge her father's plans in her own way.
She does. And her rebellion, while maybe less overt than Jessica's, is just as profound.
In what way?
Well, she falls in love with Ferdinand, despite her father's, disapproval. She's innocent, maybe even naive, but her love throws a wrench in his plans. He has to, reevaluate his own desires because of her.
It's like Shakespeare is showing us that even in the most restrictive environments, women can find ways to assert their will.
Right. Fascinating, isn't it? And unlike Portia or Jessica, Miranda never cross-dresses in the play. Why is that, do you think?
Oh, that is interesting. I'm not sure. Maybe because she doesn't need to.
Maybe. Or is Shakespeare hinting at something else about her character, about her power? Lots to think about.
This is all so thought-provoking. I'm already seeing these characters in a whole new light.
That's the magic of Shakespeare, right?
He really makes you think.
He does. And we've only just scratched the surface. We were just talking about cross-dressing.
Right.
And how Shakespeare uses it to, really highlight these women's agency.
Yeah.
I think it's incredibly significant, especially,
Yeah.
when you consider the whole social and religious context of Elizabethan England.
Okay, help me understand that a little bit better.
Okay.
We talked about how women were expected to be subservient.
Right.
But what was the big deal about clothing?
Clothing wasn't just about fashion back then, It was about, order. It was about reflecting the God-given hierarchy of the world, right?
Right.
Men wore breeches, women wore dresses. It was all very, very clearly defined.
Right.
And a woman wearing men's clothing, that was a direct challenge to that order, a kind of social and religious transgression.
So it was more than just, being unfashionable.
Oh, way more.
It was almost like...
It was blasphemous.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was seen as unnatural, dangerous even. There were actually laws against it.
No.
And yet Shakespeare puts his female characters in these situations where they're disguising themselves as men.
Yeah, he does.
Why do you think he takes that risk? What do you think's going on there?
Well, we've talked about how it allows them to move more freely, right? To do things they couldn't do otherwise.
Yeah.
Like Portia, disguised as a lawyer.
Yeah.
She's able to save Antonio's life in the courtroom.
Right.
That would have been unthinkable for a woman in her position.
Exactly. It would have been impossible. And Jessica, dressed as a boy, escapes her father's house.
Right.
Sails off to a new life.
Right.
So their disguises, they allow them to break free from those prescribed roles.
Yeah.
To take control.
Yeah.
In a way that wouldn't be possible otherwise.
But it's not just about practicality, is it?
No.
I feel like there's something deeper going on.
Oh, for sure.
It's like Shakespeare's using this cross-dressing
Yeah.
to make us question the whole idea of, what it means to be male or female.
Yeah.
If clothes are all it takes to change your identity, then maybe those categories aren't so fixed after all.
Exactly. You're getting it.
Right.
By blurring those lines,
Yeah.
Shakespeare's challenging the very foundation of that patriarchal system, right?
Yeah.
And for an Elizabethan audience, this would have been so provocative.
And probably a little unsettling,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
To
absolutely.
see these women stepping outside the boundaries of what's considered like natural,
Right.
acceptable. It makes you wonder what Shakespeare was really trying to say about women,
Yeah, what was he up to?
their place in society.
Was he critiquing those rigid gender roles? Was he celebrating, female ingenuity?
Hmm.
Or maybe both. I mean, it's a question that, continues to fascinate scholars and audiences, even to this day.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, that Miranda in The Tempest, she never cross-dresses.
Right.
Her situation's so different from Portia or Jessica's.
Right.
She's isolated on this island with only men for company.
Yeah, you'd think she'd be the one.
Yeah, exactly.
Most eager to, try on a different identity.
Yeah,
It is curious, isn't it?
it is.
Perhaps Shakespeare is suggesting that Miranda, despite her limited world, already possesses a kind of agency that Portia and Jessica have to fight for.
Because she's so innocent,
Yeah.
untouched by the complexities of society.
Maybe. Or perhaps it's because she's not bound by the same social expectations, right?
Right.
She doesn't have a father trying to control her marriage. Or a community dictating her behavior, right?
Right.
In a way, her isolation gives her a kind of freedom that the other women don't have.
It's almost like she's living in this, pre-fall state
Yes.
before those rigid gender roles were even established.
Exactly. She's like Eve in the Garden of Eden, before the concept of sin and shame even entered the world.
Right.
And yet, even in her innocence,
Yeah.
she demonstrates this remarkable strength of will,
Yeah.
Remember, she's the one who proposes marriage to Ferdinand.
Oh, that's right.
Bold move.
Yeah, she did.
For any woman, let alone a young woman in that era.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
And she defends her love for him even when her father, expresses doubts.
Right.
Right. Miranda may not defy her father outright, but she certainly makes her own choices.
She's
She's not a passive pawn in his game.
Right.
She's a force to be reckoned with.
She is.
Yeah.
So we've got these 4 women,
4 amazing women.
all challenging patriarchal norms in their own ways.
Yeah, they are.
Portia with her wit and her, legal maneuvering.
Right.
Jessica with her bold escape.
Yeah.
Nerissa with her, subtle jabs,
The little digs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Miranda with her just, unwavering love and her self-assurance.
It's incredible
It really is.
how Shakespeare gives each of them, such a distinct voice and personality.
That's what makes him so brilliant.
That's what makes him Shakespeare, yeah.
He doesn't give us simple answers
Yep.
or flat characters.
Nope.
He gives us these complex,
European.
multifaceted women
Yes.
who make us question our own assumptions about gender and power and agency.
Exactly.
He does it all within the constraints of his time, right?
He does.
Navigating censorship, social expectations,
Right.
to deliver these subtle, powerful messages about the human condition.
It's amazing.
It is.
And what's even more remarkable is how those messages continue to resonate with us today. The struggles these women face, the desire for freedom, the need to define their own identities, the
Yeah.
challenges of love and loyalty. These are universal themes.
Yeah.
They transcend time and place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Hasnobana, we've explored how these women challenge expectations, both within their families
Right.
and within, that larger context of Elizabethan society.
Yeah.
We've seen how they use their intelligence, their
Yeah.
wit,
Right.
even their disguises,
Right.
to assert their agency.
And take control.
They remind us that the fight for agency is not a new one, right?
No, not at all.
And that there are many ways to resist,
Many ways.
to subvert,
Yes.
to create change.
It's ongoing.
It is.
It is.
But what does it all mean for us, the audience, right?
Yeah.
Both then and now.
That's the question we're going to grapple with
Yeah.
in the final part of our deep dive. So we've spent all this time with Portia and Jessica and Nerissa and Miranda, seeing how they, navigate this tricky terrain of being a woman in Shakespeare's world.
Yeah. And it's amazing how much their stories still resonate with us, all these centuries later.
It really is.
Their struggles,
Right.
their
Right.
triumphs, their desires.
It's like Shakespeare tapped into something timeless,
About the female experience.
Absolutely.
Think about Portia.
Yep.
She's brilliant, she's wealthy, but ultimately her fate is determined by this casket test.
Right.
Hmm?
Designed by her dead father.
Exactly.
It's like How many women, even today, still feel constrained by those expectations that were set for them, like long before they were even born?
It's a good point.
Right. And it makes you wonder
Yeah.
if Portia's brilliance, her wit, her ability to manipulate the system, is that partly a result of her having to, like, constantly outsmart these limitations that are placed upon her?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Right. And then you have
No.
Jessica making this dramatic escape from her father's control, converting to Christianity, embracing a new life.
Yeah.
It's a story about rebellion,
Hmm.
but also about the cost of that rebellion, right?
Right. She gains her freedom,
Yeah.
but she loses her family, her heritage, her sense of belonging.
Exactly. It's a powerful dilemma
It is.
that I think, a lot of people, regardless of gender, can relate to.
Absolutely.
And what about Nerissa? I feel like she often gets overlooked,
She does.
but she's so sharp,
Yeah, she is.
so quick-witted.
Yeah,
Even in her role as a servant, she finds ways to, like, challenge the men around her.
she does. Yeah.
She uses humor, she uses wordplay, she uses her knowledge of Portia's plans to, like, subtly disrupt that patriarchal order.
It's a quiet kind of rebellion,
It is.
but it's no less effective.
Not at all.
And then there's Miranda, this innocent soul.
Yeah, raised in isolation.
Right, but who exhibits such strength in her love for Ferdinand.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like she embodies this kind of pure, unadulterated agency, untouched by the complexities and corruptions of, the outside world.
Right, and her story, it really makes you question, like, can true freedom only exist outside of societal constraints?
Right. Is it possible to find agency within those constraints?
Like Portia and Rissa seem to do.
Yeah, or is a complete break necessary, like Jessica chooses?
Like Shakespeare's offering us not one answer,
Right.
but a whole spectrum of possibilities, different ways of being a woman, in this world that's designed by men for men.
Exactly. And by presenting these diverse female characters, he forces us to, like, confront our own assumptions about gender and power and freedom. What choices do we have? What sacrifices are we willing to make? What kind of world do we want to create for ourselves and for future generations, right?
These are questions that are just as relevant today
Oh, absolutely.
as they were in Shakespeare's time.
Yeah, and that's why, his plays continue to be performed and studied and debated centuries later.
They do.
They hold up this mirror
to our own society.
Yeah, forcing us to grapple with these same issues, right?
Justice and equality.
Yeah, and the complexities of human relationships.
So Hassan al-Banna, I think we've done a pretty good job exploring your question about Jessica and Portia.
Yeah, I think so.
And in doing so, we've really uncovered, like, this rich tapestry of female experiences in Shakespeare's world.
We've seen how these women challenge expectations, they defy their fathers.
They carve out their own paths.
Even within the constraints of a patriarchal society.
And they remind us that the fight for agency is not a new one,
Not at all.
and that there are many different ways
So many ways.
to resist and to
They
subvert.
to create change.
And most importantly, I think they invite us
They do.
to keep asking these tough questions,
Right.
To keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.
And to strive for a world where all individuals, regardless of gender, can live freely and authentically.
You got it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Shakespeare's women.
It was my pleasure.
We hope you'll continue to explore these fascinating characters
I hope so too.
and the timeless themes they embody.
Because, as Shakespeare himself once wrote, the play's the thing,
To catch the conscience of the king.
and of ourselves.